Last time I was for the Oktoberfest, they gave me this. Anyway, good to see all of you here. It's a pleasure to be back. So I just wanted to share a few things, and I know we'll have a beautiful conversation later with Martha and the others. But I thought, yes, here it is. What I'll show today is a little bit of our research work from Sensible City Lab. City Lab is in Boston, but we've also been developing small labs studying cities globally. The latest one is Seoul, looking at AI and public space, and also some of our work from the office. Now, just to start, I want to say we're passionate about cities. If you need to remember 4 numbers about cities, remember the following one: 3, 55, 75, and 80. Cities are only 3% of the surface of the planet. They're 55% of the population, 75% of energy consumption, 80% of CO2 emissions. So if we can do something to make our cities a bit more sustainable, that can be a big deal globally. And today we can use many things, including data. Data is unveiling new dimensions of cities we couldn't see just a few years ago. The beautiful thing is that we can look at a city like a living thing. This is Lisbon, mapped using billions and billions of data points collected from the mobility network. This was done by Pedro Cruz from our lab at MIT. He was at MoMA in New York. But basically, the city becomes a living organism. And more, this also applies to buildings, to things around ourselves. You know, you could say that technology is starting to hybridize and make the physical environment something that behaves in a much more similar way to the natural environment. And that is also what we were exploring last year at the Venice Biennale with intelligence, natural, artificial, collective. How, you know, we need to go beyond the idea of intelligence. When you say intelligence, everybody today thinks about AI, even more narrow focus about LLMs or ChatGPT. But there's much more intelligence, natural, artificial, collective, in order to shape the built environment. And those forces have been at play now for thousands of years. I will not talk much about the Biennale. I will not talk about the Biennale at all today. Some of you, many of you were there, were part of it, participated. But we can discuss it later. What I wanted to talk today is what was inspired for me by the title, Why Architecture Matters. And I got a question: why are we all here when we could do this via Zoom? You know, what's the point about coming to this place? And I think that's a key question for architecture today. We design places, and what happens here that doesn't happen when we connect just in a digital way? And so I want to tell you about an experiment we did at MIT. This experiment was totally unexpected. Just before COVID, 6 months before COVID, we managed, after long conversations with the MIT Ethical Review Board, the ERB, every time you do research using human subjects, you need to put together protocols, make sure you don't, there's no privacy implications, and so on. It's very important. And so, you know, you need to discuss with the internal ethical review committee at MIT called COIS. And so we managed to collect data about the MIT network. The MIT network means here the email network. We don't know anything about the content of the emails. We don't even know the names of the people who send emails, but we know that we got nodes, people on the MIT campus, and those people are connected because they exchange some kind of information. So we managed to get this before COVID. And then COVID came at MIT on the 23rd of March, 2020, MIT went into shutdown. And so we did, somehow with all the tragedy of COVID, this was the experiment that you can never do as a social scientist. You take a variable, which is the variable we all deal about, space. You remove it. People don't meet in physical space anymore. And then 2 years later, you put it back. What happens to people then? So that's the day MIT closing announced, 23rd of March, 2020. Now, look at this. Before COVID, I'm going to show you now a very simple data visualization of the MIT network. Every dot is a person, and every link is a connection between the people. So this is the MIT campus, how it looks before COVID. And if you look at that, these are a very simple visualization. They're made using network visualization based on some kind of Spring-based approach. So you see the people get clustered together in every department because they exchange more information. You see here computer science, architecture, art, all the different departments and how they connect. You could say that's a snapshot of the MIT campus before COVID. And then 23rd of March 2020, lockdown, you just plot it, it looks like this. It is very different. So we started thinking, what changed? And what changed is really related to the key thing we're all doing, to physical space. You remove physical space from the equation. Imagine the same meeting today. We don't do it in person. We do it just via Zoom. Well, something changes. And we spend 1 year to look at all the network science parameters. Closeness, centrality, betweenness, centrality, everything seems the same. And then at one point, we discover something. To tell you what we discover, I need to tell you about the definition. This is nothing else than a definition. Think about all your friends. You can put them into two buckets, weak ties and strong ties. You see them there, you know, strong ties in blue and weak ties in orange. Let me tell you about a strong tie. This is only a definition, is somebody whom you know, who's also friends of your friends. One example, I know Martha, I know Liz, Martha and Liz know each other. If you plot it on a piece of paper, it is a triangle. But then we got weak ties. Weak ties are people we know who are not friends of our friends. So I know Alex, and Alex is not a friend of my friends, and so he becomes a connection to another community. So far, I only told you the definition, but there's a huge amount of literature in sociology about the importance of weak ties. And this goes back to a very famous paper by a sociologist, Mark Granovetter. He's at Stanford now. He did a paper 50 years ago when he was at Johns Hopkins. And he wrote this beautiful paper, cited tens of thousands of times, called The Strength of Weak Ties. The story is very simple. If you got strong ties, you know, we know each other is a triangle, and that easily becomes, call it like an echo chamber. We tell each other the same story. I tell it to Martha, Martha tells it to Liz, and Liz tells it back to me. So the same information goes around in circle. But weak ties are very important because usually they challenge our preconceptions. They're connections to another community. They're something that exposes to different ideas. They're super important for creativity. Well, I think now you got most of the story. This is the paper, if you're interested. It was in Nature Computational Science, done with Robin Dunbar. Some of you might know Robin Dunbar. He's a professor at Oxford. He's the person who developed and discovered the Dunbar number. The Dunbar number says that we are kind of evolved monkeys, and we have a number of friends that is quite stable, like monkeys, and that number is defined by the Dunbar number. And so what we discover here is exactly that. Look at this, the 23rd of March 2020, the amount of weak ties generated on the MIT campus goes down 80%. Well, the 23rd of March is when lockdown was enforced, but in the previous 2 weeks, we started not going to campus anymore. And then we started, working from home, and you see how it starts going down, and then it goes down 80%. If you look at this, and if you look at this over time, this almost looks like that's again the MIT campus, the brain of MIT, you could say, and somewhat like a shrinking brain, because we start removing all those weak ties, and little by little, our social networks become weaker and weaker, and we lose that very important thing, this very human thing about ideas circulate among ourselves. And so what I want to tell you this is what has inspired a lot of our work. How can we, as architects, do really the most important thing? The title here is Architecture Matters. It matters because of physical space. How can we promote the beautiful thing that happens in this conference and wouldn't happen if we were just all connected via Zoom? This is a new museum, Digital Culture Center in Milan. This was initially, it's an old palace, and it was initially refurbished by Guy Olenti a few decades ago. And there are many different levels coming from historical things, and we tried to connect them to make not only staircases, but to make almost like a vertical plaza, which is what you see here. So that place, you see here the entrance, becomes a place where you try to maximize collision. Think about people like in physics, almost particle colliding, so that actually weak ties emerge. So this is a space, this is how it's being used. There are even more crowded one, but I could get in trouble with the fire commission. And you're trying to do this. Or this is another building. This is kind of the largest museum complex in Italy now. It's also in a a 17th century palace. It's called, well, originally it was a hospital called the Sant'Agostino in Modena. And what we did here, at the beginning when we arrived, we are restoring most of it. Most of it is restoration, turning it into a contemporary museum. But then you had this kind of public space in the middle. And when we arrived, they told us, okay, we would like something like the British Museum, the beautiful project by Foster in London covering the court. But we didn't like that if you cover the court, then you're missing on how people were perceiving it hundreds of years ago. And so what we did, we worked with a friend, a colleague at Harvard, Chuck Oberman. Some of you might know Chuck, who did the Oberman sphere and beautiful structures. So we did this kind of origami roof. They can allow you to still live the building, the public space, as it was hundreds of years ago, but also cover. So you can use it when it's too hot, when it's rainy, and so on. Here is a little video of the Sant'Agostino. Yes. And this idea of how public space can also become more interactive is something we've been trying for a long time. This was very old projects we did. This is actually the Expo. We've done a lot of things at Expos. Last year was the French Pavilion in Osaka. 2020 was the Italian Pavilion in Dubai. This was the first thing we did with Expo. Expos are usually interesting for all of us. Expos, Olympics, you don't need to do something forever, and you can take more risk. I mean, Liz here has done beautiful projects at the Expos, and remember the beautiful one, the cloud in Switzerland. So you can take a bit more risk than what you can do when you just work in a city. And so in this case, again, was trying to look at interaction. In this case, in Zaragoza, the theme of the Expo was water. And so we thought about what about designing a building all made of water? Think about, like walls made of water, controlled digitally by the drop. So the walls become responsive. You approach it, it opens up to let you in. I love this picture. I took this picture. This was before the opening. You see the poor guy was going to the station. Next door, there's Ferrater station, Carlos Ferrater station. And he had a trolley, and he missed the train because he couldn't understand what the hell was happening with the pavilion. This was myself trying and testing the opening of the walls. You approach it and you get in. And this was also the opening with both the pixels made of water and pixels made of light. I'll tell you now what happened one night when all of the sensors stopped working. And that night we were terrified because we wouldn't know what would happen. The building would keep on doing its own crazy things, but without responding to people anymore. But that night was one of the most fun nights ever. That night, thousands of kids from all over the city went to the building to play a new game. Not anymore a public space that responds to you, but a place that you need to engage in a different way, like this. And then there's other type of public spaces. This is a recent public space. In Singapore is a project, a competition we won together with BIG. It's the tallest building in Singapore, is the headquarter for JP Morgan in Asia. And here in the middle, actually that's what convinced the developer to give us a commission. In the middle, we decided to put this big public space. Think about a slice of a tropical forest in the middle that becomes a place where you can meet other people, where you can meet nature. One of the things I've always suffered in Singapore, in my home, is that I feel like in a fish tank. I cannot even open windows. And so here the idea was to do that, and in doing that, you also get bonus points because you can go up. There's not enough surfaces. It would not have been the tallest building in Singapore without adding this in the middle that brings some of the real estate square footage up, but creates this public space in the middle. Again, it's almost like an Italian plaza with green, with tropical trees and also overlooking the city. You see it here, there's a few tens of thousands of trees. You see how it opens up, and it's about people meeting people, being outdoor, which is again what I find is most exciting, what I usually cannot do at home in Singapore, and also meeting nature. Nature both at the bottom, the building opens up to let it in. In the middle, we call it Capital Spring. The spring is in the middle, and then also at the top. And actually, we're surprised by creating a public space now. It is on the list of attractions, top attraction in Singapore just in a couple of years. So I think people really we like to be with each other. We like public space. We like to meet each other and meet nature, diversity. And so that's, for us, was another lesson of how sometimes you can also create a public space, not only with a commission from a government, a city government, but also in other cases. And nature is something we explored from the very beginning. That's also another very old project. This was with the first project in Italy with Patrick Blanc. He's still there. It's next to La Scala Theatre, where for those of you who are coming to Milan for Milan Design Week next week, that's the opening of Milan Design Week on Monday night. We'll all be there. And here was the first, as I say, vertical garden with Patrick Blanc, done to create like a public lounge. That part of Milan, if you've been there, is just stone, is very mineral. And so I want to bring nature more like a green cloud so that people underneath could have a coffee, a Michelin star kind of food, but also meet together, use it as a place, again, to meet with each other and meet with nature. And this is something we just opened a few months ago. It's for Mutti. We're doing a lot of work for Mutti. There's a project at Milan Design Week you might see next week that we are presenting. But this is actually their canteen. And their canteen is in the middle of the countryside. Mutti, you might know, they do the top tomato products in the world, high-end tomato products. And for them, their philosophy of Mutti is really how to connect with agriculture, with farming, and with nature. So for doing the canteen, by the way, to say the importance of food for them, I thought it was amazing. They picked a 3 Michelin star chef to run the canteen. And the design we did was actually just take a piece of land and raise it. So you look at this in the landscape, next to a very flat landscape, next to Parma. You just raise it, and then you eat underneath. You could say, the beautiful painting, déjeuner sur l'herbe. You could say, it's almost like déjeuner sous l'herbe, eating under this thing. And you see it here. This was just completed a few months ago. You see the parts inside. Again, it's a place where people can come together and here connect around food. It's called Qui si mangia. Here we eat. It's going to be open also to others beyond the canteen. It's a canteen, but also open to a broader public. And so this is more engaging with the landscape, a space of gathering, engaging with the landscape, which is also related to something we are presenting this year. This is about thinking about what we do on the Alps. And we're doing a lot of work for the Olympics that I'll show it to you in a moment. And for the Olympics in Milano Cortina, also in the past. And so here was, usually when you look at bivouac or buildings we design on the Alps, they always look like, something has landed on Mars. And here we try to say, can we do something else? Like in Mutti, can we start from the landscape and create a bivouac? A bivouac is similar to public space. It's a space when you can meet together, when you're on the mountains, when you can get shelter. If you've got a problem, you can get together and support each other. So here they started by doing a full 3D scanning of the site and then doing a digital fabricated element. This will be under construction, done by next year. You see it here. You see here with, it becomes an extension of this kind of rock that continues. You enter from the top, as you see it here. And then, when you're going inside, the design is still finalized because we did a 3D scan, but then there were some changes, so we need to redo it now that the snow melts, and then we'll really fit this in a way that it becomes like an extension of the existing rock. And as I was saying, and here you see all the beautiful valley, and that's part of what we've been thinking also and doing for the Olympics. One of the things we did the cauldron and the torch. In the torch, and the torch as well is something that unites people. Again, it's like another way to bring people together. In the Olympic torch, we try to take a different approach than what is usually done. Usually for the torch, you got the technical core, the burner, and then people do something like it's almost like, here you know it very well, it's like a car design exercise. You got a motor, the engine, and you put something around it. Here what we try to do is what is the minimum design we can put around it. How can we minimize shape? Sustainability starts by using less. There's other dimensions of sustainability here. It's biogas. It is, we managed to make it refillable. So for the first time, there's 1/10 of the normal amount of torches you have, which, by the way, we didn't think about it, but so now it made them super expensive on the second market, because usually you produce it, for every torch bearer, and we decided to do it only 1/10. So now it's, that has made them almost like a collectible. But the key thing is using less. So it's only 1 kilo of recycled aluminum. This is how the Olympic and the Paralympic torch. And by doing the minimum shape, we saw something we liked. Also with this little slot that allows you to see how the flame is generated. Again, how when we come together, we can be more transparent in this case about technology. And here you see when it was lit and how it started going around the planet with different torch bearers. And I get into the end of this. I want to tell you about something about Venice. And this is about water, is about climate, and again, it's about public space. Now, you all know this. What is this? Yes, okay. Aldo Rossi, but Teatro del Mondo, 40 years ago, his point, this beautiful thing, Teatro del Mondo, the floating theater, and the message was very clear. It was, architects can still build a piece of Venice. By putting it there with postmodernism, it was the year of La presenza del passato, la strada nuovissima. The idea was architecture can go back to build, pre-modern things. But let's face it, today, as architects, we don't need to build anything. As architects in Europe, in America, in North America, in South America, population is not growing. And the amount of square meters per person are not changing. Which means, let me phrase it better, because I see some scared faces, that we need to build, but not to build new things. We need to fix what you already have. There's a lot of work to regenerate, to refurbish, but not really to go and keep on building in the countryside. There's a little bit of growth in Africa, but most of the world has fertility rate under 2. 2.1 is stable population. Most of it is under 2.1. China lost a couple of million people. That's why China is not building anymore in terms of, in terms of residential developments. Japan lost, I think, a couple of million people per year. Japan, 800,000. So I think we need to face this. And so the question was, what could we do at last year Biennale, starting from this new condition, plus the key condition we tried to explore at the Biennale, how can we adapt to a changing planet? Mitigation is still very important, reducing emissions, but adapting to a climate that has already changed is vital. And so the experiment we tried here was, can we do a public space, again a plaza, that brings people together, that is on the water, and actually is the minimum disturbance to the water in order to be inhabitable, which is what you see here. And can we do it in a way that can go up and down with the amount of people, so you always have the impression of being really at the level of the water. It becomes responsive, going up and down, so you're always like at the level of the water, but you can inhabit that place and connect with nature. So the opposite message of Aldo Rossi, but somehow a similar principle. So this was the little model at the Biennale. This was built, presented, we did this with Howler Yoon. This was built and presented in Venice. You see it here. The water also goes inside. What you see to the right is actually the increasing level of the water of sea level rise in 2100. What you see to the right. You see it here. By the way, next to it there was Diller and Scofidio beautiful pavilion. They won the Golden Lion this year. Also dealing with water. So here you see some of the usage of it in Venice. And but after Venice, we wanted this to have a long-term home. You see it here. You see to the left the Arsenale. You see all of Venice, the San Marco's thing. And so this became the centerpiece of COP30, the Conference on Climate in Belém, in the middle of the Amazon. And this will stay in the long term as a public space, a space for conversation, for discussion about climate, for exhibitions, in the middle of the Amazon. So you see here going to go on a boat. We use an existing boat in order to minimize emissions. Going to Belém. Here you see it arriving to Belém in the middle of the Amazon. You see it's a bit different. There's a roof in Belém. Rain and sun are really strong, so we had to add a roof to it. You see it here. That's the most beautiful piece in Belém, in the middle of the Amazon. It's the House of 11 Windows, where basically all of Belém, colonial Belém started. The house is the one you see connected to Aqua Plaza. We call it Aqua Plaza, like a floating plaza on water. You see it here from the city. On the other side, there's nothing anymore. On the other side, you can go for thousands of miles just in the middle of the Amazon. You see it here with the roof. You see it here being used. This being Brazil, it also soon acquired an unexpected uses as a sambódromo. People playing samba there in the evening, so it became very popular. You know, there were just in the opening, there were thousands of people who went there to play music and dance together on the water. And here you see it in, from the city, like almost this thing that has landed in the Amazon on the water and connect nature, natural and artificial, a bit like what we try to do at the Biennale. So I'll stop here with the projects from our office, but I want to finish with something we're studying still at MIT. We started with MIT, I'll finish with that. And I wanted to, so the key point was what we design, physical space, is still very important. We cannot replicate things digitally, as we said before. When we come together, weak ties and magic happens. It's the magic we all have experienced here. Bumping into people we were not seeing, or creating weak ties, having dinner tonight and again, discovering new ideas. But at the same time, there's something threatening a little bit of that. And here I wanted to finish. We've been looking really at public space from a visual point of view. Anybody know who's this guy? He was born not too far from here. No, Camillo Sitte. Camillo Sitte, over 100 years ago, at the end of the 19th century, in Vienna, did a lot of research, was really studying public space. And in particular, in this beautiful book, Städtebau, look at public space by visually analyzing it. He looked at the time, at a lot of public spaces across where he could travel, mostly Europe, and then also was doing sketches to see what works, what doesn't work, what people like, what people don't like. That is linked to what at the time was very important in Vienna was, the beginning of Gestalt, in terms of psychology, was a pure visibility theory that basically by looking at things, we can say a lot about how they work. And that continued. This guy, Kevin Lynch at MIT, wrote this beautiful book. He's kind of the father of planning at MIT, The Image of the City. And he says in The Image of the City, this book is about the look of cities and whether this look is of any importance and whether it can be changed. And what he did with his students from MIT, went around Boston over years, and look at many of the landmarks, try to understand how we navigate space and again, how space brings us together. There was another guy at the same time, this person, Alan Jacobs, and Alan Jacobs also looked at the city, the physical city, to look at cues. They can tell us something by looking at a place. If you look at this place, you can learn a lot about it. How the stairs is being used. It's not only a stairs. The stairs is a little bit the same idea I showed you in the first project at Meet in Milan, a stair, but it's also part of a gathering place. Or, you can say a lot of things about how it works. Well, today, what they were doing, this is a big line of research from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And what they were doing by using pictures and analyzing it can be done on a massive scale. First of all, because we got a giant amount of pictures. If you look at this is actually Google Street View. For every city in the world, you got, you can look at it visually because somebody has been scanning Google and others and getting pictures for every single street, little street in the city. And so what we did is start to analyze that with AI. The beautiful thing with AI is that you can teach AI something. This is not LLMs. Is what is called deep learning. You teach it, you do what is called a training set, and then AI will do what they were doing in the 50s or 60s and 70s with a lot of students for a long time. Now you can do in a second, in a few minutes, analyze millions of images. So in this paper, we are looking at how the visual intelligence, how we can apply AI to visual images of cities, what we call visual intelligence, to understand again how public space works. There's another paper, all the papers are on our website at MIT if you're interested in looking at this in more detail. And this brings it to the end, which is this guy. This guy was an amazing guy called William H. White. William Holly White. Most people would call him Holly White. And in the 60s and 70s, he was looking at the city for the first time using video footage. He was using Super 8 cameras at the time. He wrote this beautiful book. And, he was doing this and analyzing this to see how people use public space. And he will look at different places. He will look at sidewalks in New York. If you go to Bryant Park, you need to say, thank you, Holly White, because the reason it was preserved was because of him. He did this video next to New York Public Library, really looking how people follow the sun, the shade, how they move, what we put there, how the configuration is important, how people like each other or don't like each other. And at the time, actually, you see people make friends. They don't have phones. So you go to public space and you make friends. So you see it here. And he was taking the footage and then analyzing to turn it into something quantitative, so you could measure it. It was a way to look at design, the configuration of public space, and how that works. So he was doing this. And through that, he would actually measure it, what works, what doesn't work, how architects could design better places. Well, unfortunately, he writes in the book, taking footage, Super 8 footage is fun, but actually analyzing is a difficult thing, is the crux. And so what we did in a paper I'll show you now is actually, again, use AI. Today, AI can do what he was painfully doing, analyzing all of that footage, again, in seconds. What would take months can be done in seconds or minutes. And you look at this, this is, again, deep learning. You look at features. You can segment the image, look at people, look at other things, and then you can do exactly the things he was doing. Here you see people even more precise in how they're moving. So what we did is go back. We talked to the archives and people who have all the archive by Holly White, and we got back all of the Super 8 footage from the 1970s and 80s. And then we took contemporary footage for the same places, and we started comparing it. And there we discovered something that actually troubled us. Here's a paper, if you're interested, exploring the social life of urban spaces through AI, done with a great colleague and collaborator at Harvard, Ed Glazer. You might know Ed, who does a lot of economics and studies cities with the lens of economics. But basically, we discovered that now we linger much less in public space. We look at places in New York, in Boston, and in Philadelphia. We walk faster, 15% faster, because we look at our phones. Usually faster, unless we bump into a street pole, because we're looking at the phone, but we are not looking at the people anymore. We're just, it's becoming more like a transactional space. And you see it here. That applies to all the different places we analyze. You find it in the paper. You see, how these change over time. And also mostly solo walkers. That has gone up 68%. And you see it here. We used to meet in public space. And now look at the difference, 1980s to 2010, the difference in group encounters. You can see it. People go there and then meet other people. You see it in the video, and that has changed. And so this is bringing to something we want to study more, because I started by saying public space, physical space, is what we all design, and is very, very important. But at the same time, it looks like that importance is also changing, and something fundamental might be changing in public space. In public space, as we know, since the Agora, the Athenian Agora, is the most important thing. That's where the community comes together. And that's also the magic, as I said before, that happens in a place like this, where we, again, exchange ideas, and together, we can be more than each of us individually. So what we're doing now, and this is just work in progress, is done by a postdoc in our lab called Song. We actually collected thousands and thousands of representations of public spaces. We decided to focus on Venice because it's the most depicted city, represented cities in the world, so there's so many paintings and engraving and so on. And then we're using AI to analyze it. And really what we are seeing is something that could be perhaps related to what Richard Sennett, who's a colleague at MIT, we teach together a class at MIT, he called many years ago in a beautiful book, The Fall of Public Man. So basically, this dimension of public space, or being in physical space, the spaces we design as architects, the spaces that matter, to go back to the title of the conference, that magic may be is disappearing. And that's something we want to investigate and see how as designer we can maybe contrast it. I'll finish here and look forward to the conversation.